Miriam, thank you so much for joining me today on How She Led to Me. I got to know you through a group that we work with called the Pro Human Foundation. And Maryam, for many people who are joining us, is the author of This Is Not a Memo on Substack, which I love. You're working on your first book. I'd love to hear more about that. You're an entertainment and marketing executive. And I was amazed. I mean, this is fantastic. You led global marketing partnerships and promotions at Marvel Studios and 20th Century Studios and Disney, overseeing theatrical and streaming campaigns in film and TV. So you have a really interesting work background. But I want to talk to you about your actual background, your family, your childhood, and the women in your life who have inspired you. So can you talk first off? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here to speak to you today.
Of course. And so I was so compelled by your background as an Iranian American, and I was curious to know, how long did you spend in Iran? When did your family come here? And I know that you have some wonderful stories to share about the women in your family lineage. So from the beginning, where were you?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So yes, I'm Iranian Canadian American. So my story spans, I guess, three different countries in terms of the time that I've spent in them. So I was born in Iran, and my family fled after the Iranian Revolution. So in 1979, after that, the Iran-Iraq War happened, and my mother, who is one of the women who inspires me, and I'll talk a little bit more about her and her journey later, but she was only 20 years old when she fled Iran, and I was 2 years old. So my mother got married when she was 18 in an arranged marriage to my father. And my father at the time, he was so adamant that he was going to have a girl. And back then in Iran, they weren't doing, genetic testing like they do now. So my mom didn't know what we were going to have, but he was like, we're having a girl. I just know it. And I have to figure out a way to get you out of Iran, because I don't want my daughter, my unborn daughter at the time, that he didn't know whether I was going to be a girl or a boy, to be raised in this country after the revolution happened. So while my mother was pregnant, he left Iran to figure out a way through Eastern Europe for us to also leave. And he came back from that trip with a suitcase full of little girl's clothes from Italy, my mom said. And she said to my dad, what am I going to do with all these clothes if we have a boy? And he was like, I just know it's going to be a girl, and I figured out a way out. So, once you have the baby, we're going to try to leave. And so I was a female, so I got to wear all the cute little Italian clothes that my father brought. And it took a while, though. I was really sick when I was born, and it was hard in Iran during that time. It was during the Iran-Iraq War. Trying to flee the country was very complicated. So it took about 2 years. So when I was 2 years old, my father left the country first, and my mother and I got on a train by ourselves. And like I said, my mom was about 20 years old. And thinking about, I have two little ones right now, and I'm in my early 40s, and imagining your headspace when you're 20 years old in the middle of war with a 2-year-old. You don't speak any other language but Farsi, Iranian, and you get on a train without knowing what your future holds. And that's what my mother did. And she got on a train, and she unfortunately got off on the wrong stop because my dad had sent a message for my mother and switched the train stations on her of where they were going to meet, and that message never got to my mother. So we got off on the wrong stop. It was somewhere in Denmark that we got off, and she told me it was 3 a.m. and it was freezing cold, and she didn't know how to speak the language, and she was walking around the streets of Denmark without knowing. And my father wasn't at that train station. She was terrified. And my father was waiting at another train station at that time. So they completely missed each other. So she remembered the name of the place, the hotel that he was staying at. So she went there, but he wasn't there. And then the hotel called the officials, immigration officials, on us because they my mom couldn't speak the language, so she couldn't communicate with them. And they threw my mom and I in a refugee camp. And it took my dad some time to find us because, again, we were in a new country and we didn't have proper paperwork.
Yeah.
Finally, when he did find us, we ended up spending a couple of months in that refugee camp, my mom and I, and finally worked with the officials to get us out. And then we ended up filing for political asylum and immigrating to Canada after that. And the reason we chose Canada was because my uncle, my father's oldest brother, had already left Iran at the time and was waiting for us in Montreal. So we all ended up in Montreal, and I was about 2-3 years old when we got to Canada. My grandmother, though, is the woman I would say in my life who really shaped me and really shaped my resilience and my courage. And why I share the stories and the work that I'm doing now is really because of her. And my grandmother was an Iranian Kurdish singer and actress in the 70s during the time of the Shah, again, prior to the revolution. And when the revolution happened, she was imprisoned. For being an artist, for being a storyteller. She was definitely not a woman who stayed silent. She shared, she was fierce, and she was a freedom fighter. She was Iranian Kurdish. And if you know anything about Kurdish women, she used to ride on horses with like rifles growing up. And the lineage of women that came before her were similar. So for me, when I think about somebody who has influenced and I look up to in terms of how much she's been able to overcome and what she went through, she's definitely the person who I feel like I look to, who has influenced me and who gives me the courage to keep fighting for the things that I'm fighting for in my life and what I'm trying to pass down, for my children. It really comes from her.
What's her name, by the way?
Her name was Gita.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
did she come over to Canada with you all, or did she stay?
So she has a crazy escape story. So she ended up, this was now in 1980s, because the revolution started really in 1978, and then it happened, the regime took over in the early 79. My grandmother was thrown into prison in 1980, and she was there for 4 years in the infamous Evin prison in Tehran. So if you've been following any of the Iran news, there's a lot of headlines about the political prisoners and the executions that are happening in Iran, and especially for artists and they always go after the brightest minds, right? The poets, the scientists, the intellectuals in society. And my grandmother was definitely not someone who stayed quiet. So just to rewind back a little bit about her growing up, her story in terms of why she ended up becoming a freedom fighter and doing the work that she did, is that her father was a freedom fighter, a Kurdish freedom fighter, and he was hung in the town center when she was 5 years old, along with her uncles. And so that is that is how she grew up in terms of being a freedom fighter and fighting for the lineage of independence and resistance towards the systems and the structures within society that were trying to keep people oppressed. And so my grandmother was a very strong woman from the time she was a little girl. And she ended up marrying my grandfather. So my father's dad, my father's father. And Gita was his second wife. So he had already had a few children before he married my grandmother. My grandmother had 4 children with him. My father was the youngest of all the children. prior to my father, she had 3 boys and 1 daughter. The third child she had was a daughter. Her name was Maryam, and she died of pneumonia when she was 2 years old. And so my father never ended up meeting her because by the time he was born, she had already passed, but he had heard about Maryam. So he named me after his sister, who he had never met, who was Gita's only daughter. So sorry. Whew.
That's so
Um,
sweet, though. It's
yes,
emotional. Your
it
story
is. I actually have never told anyone that publicly
needs to.
live.
It's
So
sweet. It's people can relate to it too, I think. Even if they haven't gone through obviously all the exact same things, I think that when you hear these stories, we all have some harrowing stories in our past. So I think it's wonderful. But this is particularly amazing.
So my grandmother, after she had my father, and of course with all the trauma that she had gone through in her life, she took agency over her life. And now, by now she's in her late 20s, early 30s, and she wasn't happy. She wasn't happy in her marriage. She wasn't, she had lost her daughter and she had 4 children, and she was a housewife in Iran during the time. And my grandfather was a powerful man. He was a mayor. He owned a hotel. He owned restaurants, and he owned the local newspaper in that town. So he was a powerful man. And this is the part of the story about her that I love the most, is that she left her life to follow her dreams. She left her life at that time. And when I say that, you got to think about a woman in Iran in the early 70s during that time. I mean, that's even radical for Western societies, right? So for her, she left, my grandfather wasn't, let's just say, the best man. So she wasn't happy. And getting divorced during that time, again, was very radical. Even within our society in America, people weren't getting divorced, especially after having 4 children and trying to be an actress. And so she wanted to be an actress and a singer, and she was in her late 20s, early 30s, had 4 children in Iranian society, and she left. They were living in Shiraz, I believe, or Mashhad at the time. She left and she went to Tehran, and her cousin was a actress at the time, and she got into the movie business, and she ended up becoming a star. She ended up recording Kurdish music. She was in many Iranian films, and because she was older, she wasn't, she wasn't the lead, but she was supporting in a lot of movies. And if you look back at the movies back then, a lot of the A-list Iranian celebrities, she was, going head to head with them in scenes. I have some photos if you want me to
Yes.
show you some photos of her.
She
Let me
sounds
just pull them
incredible.
up.
She really does.
So this is a film still.
God, she's beautiful.
Thank you, of her in her. This is another film still of her, and she's actually in this one across a very famous Iranian. This was a very famous movie that she did, and she was playing a madam at a brothel.
Really?
Yes, in that movie. And then this is a photo of her album cover.
Beautiful.
As Kurdish singer. So she ended up going and and when I talk about her with my father and how he felt during that time, because his mother left, and he said that she was still the best mother. I mean, he would still go, and he's like, we had the best time in Tehran when we would go and visit her, and she had the coolest house, and all these celebrities were always hanging out. And so my father doesn't have a ton of bad memories about that time when she did leave, because you might hear that story and think, how can a mother leave their 4 children? But by that time, her 2 sons were already much older because she had kids young, and her third daughter, like I said, had passed away. So it was really, my dad was the baby. He was 10 years younger than his 2 oldest his two oldest
Yeah.
brothers, but they loved going. They say we loved going visiting Giti in Tehran and staying with her. So they had very fond memories of their mother, and they were proud of her for going after what she wanted during that time. And so when the revolution happened and she was in prison for 4 years, she was raped, tortured, beaten. She ended up marrying a prison guard and got out of prison through this marriage. And she spent 2 years planning her escape through Kurdistan and through the mountains of Kurdistan into Iraq. And she left overnight one night when her husband wasn't there, but it took her 2 years to plan her escape. And when she got into Iraq, Saddam Hussein's administration, because they knew her and they knew her as a Kurdish singer, they actually welcomed her and helped her get political asylum to Canada. And that was the first time when she landed in Montreal after she fled that I met my grandmother. I was about, I think, like 6 or 7 years old.
Wow. That is cinematic. I mean,
Yes.
that's very dramatic.
Yes.
Why did she marry the prison guard? Was it to try to get help to leave, get out of prison?
Yeah. I mean, I think for her, when you're in the system, when you're a political prisoner in Iran, it's really difficult, like, to get out of that system. And for her, she had somebody who had become very fond of her within the system, this prison guard, and he wanted to marry her, and they had developed a relationship in prison. So she felt that that was her way to get out and to be able to have somewhat of a normal life. But for her, she never wanted to stay in Iran. And by that time, her three sons had all left. Her oldest son was in London. He moved to the UK. And then my father and the other brother were in Montreal. So when she came out, her sons weren't even in Iran anymore. They had all moved their families outside of the country.
Did you see your father? I mean, your father hadn't seen his mother then for a while because he must have been worried sick about her the whole time.
Yes.
What was there? I mean, you were 5 or 6 at the time, right? But what was
Yeah,
there?
I was about 6 years old. I think about 6 years old.
Was that, I mean, was it like a seamless transition? I'm just curious, how does that work? Because you're carrying she was coming to you traumatized from her experience
Mhm.
in prison. Your father, even though he didn't have resentment towards her outwardly, it is an interesting thing to make that decision to leave your kids. And she must have, by the way, trusted your grandfather with your father. I mean, he was maybe not the best husband, but she must have, if she left her kids with him or your father with him, she must have trusted him to not be abusive or to take care of him or whatever he could.
Yeah, and my grandfather wasn't abusive to the
Okay.
to the children. He was just a bit of a womanizer. He was
Oh,
just he just he
that's
just
different.
liked his ladies, you know?
Okay.
So, and I think again, Giti just was sick of it.
Yeah.
She was like, I'm out. And he actually ended up remarrying his first wife after Giti left him. Yes.
Really?
So he always took care of all his children. And all my father worked for my grandfather in the business, in the family business, in the hotels and in the restaurants. And it's funny because my father ended up opening up restaurants in Vancouver and then later in Los Angeles, named Cash School. And the very first Cash School was in my grandfather's hotel in 1969. So he carried that lineage of his father's business with him throughout his life, and the family recipes and all of that carried through him. So, my father doesn't have my grandfather wasn't the best man to women, and he wasn't like abusive, but he was I guess it's a type of abuse. He was a womanizer,
Yeah.
and back then in Iran, and even some men now, they have multiple wives, and it's completely legal, and the women know about each other. So I think for my grandmother, when she married my grandfather, he was married to a first wife, and she made him get a divorce because it was more prevalent for women to get a second wife and not even divorce the first wife back then
Mm.
in Iran. And so she had just had enough and she left, and he ended up remarrying his first wife. So his first wife had an eldest daughter. She was the my dad's half sister, who is the eldest of all of the seven children, or six children. And my Amme is auntie in Farsi. She ended up raising my father because my father was the youngest, and his brothers by that time, they were already 10 years older than him, and they were
Yeah.
teenagers and didn't want to, they didn't want to have their little brother following them around. And uh my grandmother, that's not my real grandmother, but the first wife of my grandfather, had resentment and didn't want to raise Giti's kids.
Wow.
And so my auntie, my Emme, who's a lovely woman, ended up raising my father pretty much
You must
under.
have.
Yeah. So whenever he speaks about his childhood, he speaks about being raised mostly by his eldest sister, the only sister because it was all boys, and then going to Giti's in Tehran, and he did spend time in Tehran, but obviously when he was in school and stuff. So that's how he's explained it to me in terms of his upbringing.
When she so you were 6, you said, when when you met your grandmother for the first time. What was that relationship like? I mean, what did she pass on to you that you hold so dear now? Like, was there, because I think a lot of what you write about is about self-confidence, and you write about, being not afraid to like make a career change and things like that. Did she share some of that with you?
She did. And I think, she didn't talk a lot about, obviously, when I was younger, I didn't really know what was happening at that time. I just knew that my grandmother from Iran had just arrived. I didn't know that she was arriving from 4 years of torture in prison. I didn't know how she had escaped. I learned about her story as I got older. And of course, they didn't want me to know that stuff at 6, 7 years old. But as I spent more time with her and she shared more of her story, I started to understand why she was the way she was. And a lot of people felt that my grandmother was, um, she was, direct and harsh,
Mm.
and she was very direct and fierce, and she was polarizing. But I have a lot of empathy for her because I understand where her trauma comes from and what she had to survive. And I think that what I saw in her and is that she was a woman who went after what she wanted regardless of what society,
Mhm.
what people, what the culture wanted her story to be. She rewrote her story over and over again. And I think that's what I try to carry forward. And I try to share my journey with other people through my writing, through my Instagram, through the book that I'm writing, because I think that as a society, we get so stuck in a specific narrative that we feel that we need to live by. And so many of us are terrified to change the script, to shift, to question, to critically think about what else is there. And I watched Giti do that, and I saw her challenge people, not in a way where she was trying to, be righteous. She
Mhm.
did it in a way that she challenged systems,
I love
and
that.
and she didn't take things at face value. She interrogated. And I think that I have so much of that in me and the way that I move through the world. And I think it really does come from her, because I watched her move through the world, even the way that she fought for her health, because she had a lot of health problems as she got older, and she spent a lot of time in hospitals. And she would sometimes scream at the doctors, and I'm not saying that's a good thing, but because they were telling her something that she didn't fully believe she had advocates for. And so she fought for herself to get more answers, to get better health care. And that is really the through line, is having the courage to advocate for yourself. And I've had my own health problems that I've struggled with, especially the last few years. And it reminds me of her, and how if somebody says something to you, don't take it at face value. Go and do more research, ask more questions, get a second opinion, and fight for yourself. And that's really what I'm trying to, the legacy that I'm trying to build within my own life, and help share that with people, to help inspire them, because I know it's not easy to be a Gita, and most people aren't Gitis. But if I can share how she has influenced me and the courage that I carry forward, hopefully it will inspire other people to be a little bit more like Gita.
I love that. It resonates with me, because I do think that there is even culturally here in America, there is a feeling of, especially as a woman, don't speak up too much. You are abrasive if you are like Gita in a lot of scenarios.
Yes.
And just yesterday I was going to the doctor, and I couldn't find the suite that the doctor was in. And I was told by this one man who was trying to be helpful, oh, you go down and then go up. And I was like, really, that doesn't make sense. And the woman in the elevator said, listen to your instincts. You're right. That doesn't make sense. So he was trying to be helpful. He was wrong. My instinct was that it didn't work. And so I think so many times as women, we question ourselves, and we talk ourselves out of that instinct. And it seems to me like E.T. would have told you. I mean, in life, how is she still alive, or when
She passed away a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, she passed away a few years ago. But that woman, I always say she had 9 lives, because between the trauma that she went through, what happened to her in prison, and her health complications that she had, she lived till 92. Yeah. And she drank Coke every day.
Regular Coke or Diet Coke?
I think she drank both, but she drank Coke every day. And I laugh because I'm so health conscious. I don't drink, Coke, and I'm like very on my health journey, especially right now. And I just think about Gita, eating her kebabs and her rice full of butter and rice every single day until she was 92,
She sounds like a fantastic person. How did she deal with people who were frustrated with her? Like, she sounds smart.
She didn't care. She did not care. No. And I think that's also another part of it, is because working within corporate and entertainment and building the life and career that I have for so much of my life, I cared what other people thought. And I try to, I'm a perfectionist, type A, people pleaser, like, so many, like, trying to do multiple things, and wanting to always make sure that everyone around me is happy, and, the way that I'm perceived. And I finally feel that in the past 2 years, I've started to let go of that. And I think about, I think that when you start to live a life that is in alignment with your true self authentically, and I only feel in this past 2 years that I'm starting to build a more aligned life and redesign my life into the life that I want it to be, and what that looks like. And as I do that more, the courage to do that more is also giving me the courage to not care what people think, because I'm living a life that is authentic to me. And Giti just was always like that because she had been through so much. I think that she just didn't care what people thought. She was just authentically herself. And I think there's so much freedom in that, and I think so many of us are so afraid to be seen. We're afraid to put our thoughts out there and our opinions out there in a way that we are afraid to be judged. And I'm getting to a place in my life, again, inspired by her, that as I'm being more authentic with what I want, that I care less. And
Hmm.
she just kind of lived like that.
Yeah, she didn't necessarily have to tell you. It was leading by example in her
Right.
life. Looked at how she behaved. Did you all live together in Montreal and then come to California, or how did that work?
No, so Geeti was a very independent woman. She didn't want to live with us when she came to Montreal. She wanted her own place. So no, she lived with us at the beginning for a bit. She was a bit at our house and then a bit at my uncle's house because my uncle was also in Montreal. But she really is a woman who likes to be alone and she wanted her independence. So she moved out. And then we all moved to Vancouver because Montreal was really cold. And we got to a point where my mother and my father first moved. They wanted to come out west, and we moved from Vancouver when I was about to Vancouver when I was about 9 years old. And then my uncle and his family and my grandmother moved a few years later once we were settled in Vancouver. But she lived in Vancouver until she was 92. For a while, she lived in this building that had like home care. It wasn't really a home care facility, but it was just a building of older people who had help. And by help, someone who went and like cleaned her house and did her laundry and things like that and checked on her. And she was there for a really long time until she got very sick and had to be placed in hospice because of her health condition.
When you look at what's happening in Iran now, and I mean, what your grandmother saw of her country after she left, was she, deeply, wounded, and did it look like all the progress? Because I think what we learn here is what little Americans learn about Iran, honestly, is that under the Shah, it was much better. And then the Ayatollah came in, it became much more strict. And that's like the base knowledge that we know, I think. Was she watching it closely, and was she deeply disturbed?
She was, even in her state of mental and physical health that she was in, she still was wanting and hoping and dreaming for a free Iran. And especially after which, she endured and went through as a woman in that country. And to this day, when, my grandmother was in prison for 4 years, I just saw a headline on my Instagram about another Iranian singer who was solo performing at a party in Iran. I think the video that was circulating was from 2025, and they arrested her, and she's being in prison for 4 years. So it's still happening. Women are still being imprisoned, and executions are happening daily still. And so for her, when my grandmother was on her deathbed, my dad has a video of her saying that free Iran. Like she could
Like,
barely speak, but it was one of her last words that we have of her recorded, is her saying, because she passed away during the I believe women life freedom movement that happened. And I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago there was an uprising in Iran. Is 2022, 2023. And the woman life freedom movement happened because a woman was killed and shot by the regime for not having a hijab
yeah,
on, and Masajina Amini. And Masajina Amini was Kurdish. So my grandmother is Kurdish, and when that happened, she was in hospice care, and she was following along,
wow.
what was going on. So on her deathbed, she still was saying, F the regime and free Iran.
Oh
And
God. I mean, she would have probably loved to have lived out her life and stayed acting in Iran and not be forced to leave. That's her home, right? So,
yeah, of course. I mean, I don't think that we would have seen the exodus that we saw from the Iranian community and the large diaspora around the world if the revolution didn't happen. And were things perfect prior? No. But is any country perfect? I mean, of course, there was internal problems within Iranian society, even during the time of the Shah, and depending on who you speak to, people have different opinions into terms of what camp they were in during that time. But I do think that, what happened with the revolution is that the people were manipulated. They were sold a promise from what I'm told, because my parents lived through it and my family lived through it. And from the stories that I've been told from my relatives, is that they were sold a promise of a more socialist society of, free electricity and free this and free that. And so
hmm,
people didn't think that they were putting in a theocratic dictatorship, and that it was going to be, Handmaid's Tale, like really overnight in a sense. And I use that reference because I feel that a lot of people within, the Western society know that show and that book. And I don't know if people know that Margaret Atwood was inspired by the Islamic Revolution.
was she? I didn't know that.
Yes, she was inspired by the Iranian Revolution for Handmaid's Tale. And of course it wasn't as, dramatic as
Yeah.
that show in terms of, the outfits and the way that, the handmaids were trained and groomed and all of that. But there is a reality of that overnight, a fairly liberal, progressive country under a monarchy, yes, under a monarchy, turned into a society where movie theaters were being burned, anything in connection to Western ideologies and literature were being burned and shut down. Universities were being shut down. Women were then overnight forced to start covering their hair, regardless of your religion. And people who had different opinions, different religious values, Christians, Jews, they started to be persecuted. So it's like it really did feel for a lot of people that it happened overnight. So, when I think about what the women of Iran have endured
Yeah.
and continue to endure, and their bravery is also a source of inspiration for me. All of it, that the lineage of all the women who continue to fight for freedom, even when it means life or death for them, just the way my grandmother did. It makes me feel that the problems we deal with on a day-to-day basis here are so minimal,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
that if there are women who are waking up joyful and they're still have hope and resilience and they're fighting for their freedom, then I can continue to, I can find it within myself to have the courage to do the things that I want to do, and hope that by doing that, I can help inspire others to do the same.
Are you in touch with anybody in Iran now? I'm curious
I
about
am.
the
I am.
effects of the war on the Iranian women. We don't
Mhm.
hear a lot about the war on gas prices here and whatnot, but what are you hearing about the deprivation within Iran now after the war started?
People are struggling. 95% of my family still lives there, by the way. The only people who got out were Giti's children.
Wow.
Everyone else in my family, my cousins, my mother's side, my mother's mother just passed away during the war that just happened a few days ago, or sorry, a few months ago, and continues to happen. But she passed away a few months ago, and my mother couldn't go back to see her
Mm.
while she was on her deathbed. So our entire family is still there. And when I hear from them. Everybody is struggling. The communication is tough because they're tracking everything. So and so when they have to be careful when we do
Yep.
talk, what they share. But I can tell you from what they've told me, economically, people are struggling there. It is so expensive. The prices of food and yes, gas as well, but the prices of even food are 10x what they were prior to the war starting. And people aren't, people aren't able to make enough money to have even the basic necessities at this point. So they are mentally exhausted, emotionally exhausted. The mental health in the country, suicide rates are going up.
Really?
People still don't know what's going to happen to their loved ones who are still in prison from the massacres that happened in January. There are still people who are in prison who still, their families haven't been able to get them out because they were out in the street protesting. So the mental health, economic situation, and morale of the country is not good. And I think that people are just trying to survive from what I've heard from family members. They're just trying to survive because what else can they do at this point?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight, really, and it doesn't seem like it's accomplished the goal, um, in terms of really changing the hardline theocracy. I don't think it's really made a big dent in that.
No, I mean, people say that the regime has been
Weakened a
weakened.
Mhm.
And, to be honest, I'm not a geopolitical expert. So
Yeah.
I keep track of what's happening, and I have made videos and commented about the situation, but a lot of my conversations and what I've shared on my Instagram, even during the war, were references from family members and my own research and what I was hearing from people who were from the inside. But when it comes to the larger geopolitical conversation, I'm definitely not an expert in
Yeah.
in it. And and to be fair, I kind of shut my brain off from it for the last couple of months because when the massacres happened in January, I was so entrenched every single day. I was on IG and following it, and the massacres happen, and it just really impacted my mental health, especially when you have so much family there. And I was making videos on IG that went viral, and I was trying to keep people informed. And because I was seeing so much misinformation out there, that I wanted to actually contextualize what was happening based off of what I was hearing from people who were on the inside versus headlines that were clickbait and rage bait enticing. So I was sharing a lot of my family's history during that time and situation based off of the information I was getting. And I did that for a few months, but it is emotionally and mentally exhausting. And so I had to just shut myself off from it the last couple of months because you also never really know what's true in terms when it comes to geopolitics in this situation because there's so much misinformation out there. And with the current administration, one day they say they're doing something, the next day they flip it. So it was so hard to really like which side is saying the truth.
Yeah.
And that the Iranian regime is not going to also be transparent in what they're communicating. And they're one of the biggest propaganda machines out there in terms of, what's actually happening on the inside and how people are feeling. So all I will say is that from what I've gathered, my unexpert opinion is that the regime has weakened. And obviously, people people don't have a lot of faith in this government, and they didn't for obvious reasons. But people are terrified. They killed too many people on January 8th and 9th, and people are still getting executed on a day-to-day basis. So people are just terrified to come out and to protest and to uprise again. But I do think that eventually there will be change because if you look throughout history, revolutions don't usually happen overnight. They take a long time. And yes, it's been about 47 years. And every, couple of years, there's been an uprising, and then there's been government crackdowns and people thrown in prison. And, I just saw something a few days ago that said that they're trying to reinforce the hijab because they had become loose with it. And now I've been seeing some reports, again, I don't know if they're accurate or not, but I've been seeing reports that there's been a lot of crackdowns again, and they're really suppressing people and making people wear the hijab. So I think that, when they start to do that, it's because they are fearful that they're losing control. So
Yes.
I do believe it has weakened them. But the thing that people don't understand about Iran is that the Islamic Republic and the way that it is structured,
Uh-huh.
it's an intertwined system of various bodies of power that have economic control of the country. So the army, the military, the economy, it's all intertwined, and people are their livelihoods are attached to that. So it doesn't always have to come down to just religion. For them, it's their livelihood. And
Yes.
to break down a system that has a million people, let's say, connected to the economic prosperity of a country, and by them keeping this system in place
Yeah.
means that it's the only way that they're going to survive. They're going
Right.
to do whatever they can to keep it the way it is. And it's a very complicated system. It's
Yeah.
not how it is here in the US or any other country, really, the way that they operate. So I think that it's going to take some time to unravel that.
No, and I think what you're pointing to is really important because you have family there, and it's so much at stake in that country, and the mental health component of that. When you say suicide rates are up, that's something that I don't think we think about the toll that it takes. Everyone just wants to have their kids be healthy, be able to go to school, be able not to be afraid, right? And if you're living in a place where you don't have those basic needs met, it's terrifying. So it makes you appreciate what we have here, even though there's a lot to complain about.
Yeah.
Um, it's nothing. It's you got to put it in perspective. Finally, is the book that you were working on? Does it have to do with your grandmother? Does it have to do with your story? Can you share anything about it?
Yeah, I can share a little bit. The through line of it is really, I guess it doesn't have, so I'm writing two books. One is a memoir that I have been working on, and I'm not taking that out just yet. I'm going to go out with my more business leadership book. And that book is more about the silence epidemic and the things we don't say and breaking down the system. So that's what that book is about, is the courage to speak up and breaking down the system. So that's how much I can share at this point. But I am writing a memoir as well, and my grandmother's story is very much a part of that memoir. But I'm first going to go out with the business leadership book, and then the memoir will be my second book. So I've been writing them at the same time, though.
Not easy to write two books at once.
It's
Um,
not. No, it's
um,
not.
Do you have any, and this is a personal question I have for you in the business world that you're in. I'm working on a documentary that has to do with, it's in the true crime space. And I found that it's really labor intensive. It takes a long time to get anything creative out there, right?
Mhm.
When you say in your book about business and leadership, do you have any advice for that patience that comes with being in the creative space? Because I think that, I mean, I've been working on a documentary for 2 years. It's been in different stages having to do with the trial. And I mean, you have to be very patient for,
Mhm.
and I always think, and I always like to say, because it took a decade for my book to be made into a Netflix show, it was a whole thing, is that
Yes,
anything,
congratulations. That's
oh,
huge.
well, thank you. It did take a decade, but I'm so happy that it ended up happening. But it's like, when you're a passionate person, and I think you are, and I certainly am too, you feel so invested in your work. how do you kind of tell yourself, things play out. You don't have control over everything. I think a
Mhm.
lot of it, if you're a type A kind of person in the creative space, it's a very tricky place to be. Are you going to touch on any of that in your book without spilling your secrets from your book, but like how to be creative while at the same time recognizing the limitations that
Yeah. I think, I've started to really trust the process of regardless. There's many projects I'm working on right now. And I feel that we live in a society that is constantly rushing us to get to ship, right? And I think that in certain instances, there are things, especially within journalism, right, that are very timely and you have to write something and get it out. You're going to miss the moment, especially when things are happening in the larger cultural zeitgeist, right? It's timing sometimes is everything. But for me, when it comes to my creative process with the book and even the memoir, is that this has been a life dream of mine. And sometimes I feel that you are becoming what you're meant to be while you're going through the process of, and the journey of that is part of the creative process. And I've learned to trust that. And I think that because I started off as a theater kid in this industry,
uh,
and I realized that from a really young age, when it comes to creativity, it just doesn't happen fast. There is different iterations and you have to continue to edit and you have to continue to rethink and realign. And when you're writing a book, especially, I have to say I've made tweaks and changes to the title and my synopsis even in the past year because the world has changed so much. And you just have to be patient and you have to make sure that your authentic truth and what you're working towards, you have to trust the process that it's going to come at the time that it's meant to. And I know this might sound like woo woo and maybe not as tactical, but
yeah.
I do believe that there's no shortcuts. You just have to be in it and you have to do the work. And I'm giving a TEDx talk in Chicago on October 24th at TEDx Arlington Heights, and even that's been a process. The amount of drafts and redrafts and sitting in it and rethinking and working with a coach. When it comes to the creative process, my advice is don't rush it. Really trust your instinct. And I think that there's something for me anyways as a storyteller and a creative that when something clicks in me, I feel the difference. I'm like, that's it. I feel like this feels right. I'm speaking at the MLK event with ProHuman Foundation in Washington on Friday, and even that I've been working on my speech for that, and it's like 3 days away, and it doesn't feel right. I still Nope, I have to go back. I have to go back. And I think part of it is that I don't attach myself to anything. I I don't attach myself to something when I get new information or if I find a different angle. And I think that's also part of it is that I think
Mhm.
so many creatives will have a vision
Yes.
and they're like, this is the way it's got to be. But what I would say is be open to different perspectives and different angles and be open to changing your mind. And I think that we also live in a society where it's like, well, if you change your mind, you come off uncertain or yes, or not, confident. And I actually think it's the opposite. I think changing your mind when you have new information and new data and a new angle, and it's going to make the story stronger and it's going to reach the audience in a better way for the time of what's happening in the world in the global frame. You have to be open. So that's the way I go into projects. And even with my book, and why I'm hesitant to share too much about it is because I'm learning and growing and processing. And when you write a book, you get a publisher on, it takes about 12 to 18 months. So I don't really want to share a ton about it right now because it might shift and it might transform. And the world may look different in 18 months when it comes out than it is today, especially with technology and what's happening. So I mean, that's a very long answer to say be open.
Trust the process. I'm
Trust
taking.
the process. Yes,
I
trust the
love.
process. And I was actually speaking to my writing mentor this morning, and I said to her, I was like, I just got to like finish this next chapter and get it out to my agent. And she was like, Miriam, it's better to not. She literally had left me a voice note this morning saying, Miriam, when it comes to writing a book, it's better to take your time and make sure
Yes.
you're putting the best piece of creative work that you put out there, and don't rush it. And I've really just like, as a type A, I'm really learning to embrace that.
I'm gonna try to internalize some of this because I struggle. I mean, the writing is like my main thing, and you would think I would have got it down by now, but I want to rush because I still have that reporter instinct.
Yes.
Want to get it out in the world. You want to do it. But I also think listen to your editors too, because I've gotten some amazing advice from my editors after reading a draft and going through it. It's been, like even restructuring a book. I had one book where I went thematically and they said you should go chronologically. And I was like, God, I have to redo the whole thing.
Yeah,
They were right. So it's painful, right?
it
A lot
is.
painful, but that's how you
And
get to the truth, I think. So
yeah, and for me, I think with this book and the memoir, I'm only going to write this once in my life. I have other books in me, right, that I may write, but this specific topic and what I'm trying to accomplish with this book and with my memoir, so if I'm like, if it goes out when I'm 40 or if I'm 50, it doesn't matter for me as long as I get it out during my lifetime, because there's only going to be one version of this ever. So I want to make
especially
sure
the memoir, especially the
the memoir. Yeah. And that's why I'm holding on to that right now, because I feel like I need a little bit more life. I need I feel like I need to hold on to that maybe another 5 years before I release it. But I'm
yeah.
writing it, and I've been writing it, and but I feel like there's still the other part of the journey that I'm currently going through, the transformation of where I'm at right now, and the intersection of rebuilding and reinventing myself at this age with 2 kids after having a successful long corporate career. And I want to include, what that next act in my life, looks like in my memoir. So I'm not in a rush to get it out, and I'm working on it, but it may come out in 5 years, it may come out in 10, and I'm okay with that. I'm not in a rush at this point, because I have to trust the process and know that when the timing is right, everything will align when it's meant to.
It's a cathartic experience too.
Yes.
Well, I will let you go so you can work on your speech on Friday. I hope to see you in person on Friday.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to be in Washington, so I would love to meet you in person.
Love that. I would love that. Good luck with the speech and with the books. And I love your Substack. It's
Thank you so
inspirational
much.
to me in the creative space. So thank you.
Thank you. That means so much. And congratulations on all of your success. When Lori introduced us, and I was so ecstatic to speak with you. So thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Thank you. And here's to Gita. If I had
Yes, Kitty.
a Coke, I would do a little too.
92 Diet Coke or Coca-Cola every day.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you,
Okay,
Maryam. And thank you,
thanks.
everyone, for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.